All right, welcome back, everyone. It's been a while. I'm doing a lot more live streams nowadays, but every once in a while, someone brings me a new guest that wants to come on. And this one was brought to me by Chris Webb. A lot of you know him as Invest LYH, but he said, I got to meet this guy, Zach. And he told me Zach is about 22, 23 years old and was a handyman working with Chris before, but he's building a huge portfolio. So, welcome, Zach.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so I think we kind of touched offline a little bit. You know, you have 70 units across maybe 25, 30 properties. In
hmm
2025, I believe you said you got 50 units alone with a goal of getting to 100, right? So maybe you can tell my audience about kind of how you started, where you're investing, and let's dig into this goal of getting to 100.
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, I'm super happy to be here. Thanks for having me. So I started my business just under 3 years ago, 2.5 to 3 years ago. I was working a sales role for a construction company, and I wanted to start my own company, start my own business. So I left that company right after I bought my first house using a conventional loan with the W-2 that I had. And so I bought that house and I started a handyman business pretty much at the same time. Spent most of what I had on that house and started a handyman business with the goal of using that business to support me while I continue to build up a real estate business and hopefully use my construction experience to leverage into a real estate business. So I grew up in construction. My dad taught me pretty much everything I know, from a young age, which has been such an invaluable blessing to me. And I've been able to use that to leverage into the real estate business through a lot of construction related things. And so in 2022, I bought my first property right at the end of 2022. 2023, I had a goal of buying three more doors, and I ended up buying five houses, all in November of 2023. So I almost didn't hit my goal, and then all of a sudden did. And then 2024. My goal was to buy about a dozen, and I got another 14 units. And so this year, as I was goal setting, I always try to do something that's a little crazy. Like it's a little crazy to be 20 years old and buy three houses in 1 year. And I believe I was 20 or 21 at the time, and ended up buying five. And it was also crazy to me to buy 12 more units the next year. I ended up buying 14. And so as I was goal setting this year, my thought was really, how can I set a goal that's slightly attainable but really crazy. And so I set a goal to acquire a number of units this year, and so far I'm pretty much right on track for most of the year. So far, as of the end of the first half, bought 50 units, and then would love to do another 50 by the end of the year, but we'll see where that goes. But would love to just continue to grow the portfolio. So obviously, I'm sure we'll get into the nitty gritty. A lot of that has been more business building than real estate acquiring, because if you want to grow a business of this size, you're building a team, you're hiring people, you're doing all those sorts of things. And so that's where I've had to focus my attention, and the books I read and the things I try to learn and the people I seek advice from. So it's definitely shifted, and I've definitely learned a lot, but I'm right in the middle of growing, right still, in the third year of business. So there's a lot to learn, but hopefully if I've got some value to share, we'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, it sounds like, you're talking about growing and, being the third year of business, but when you bought that very first house in 2022, did you kind of already have that vision of owning 100 plus units, or did that goal evolve over time?
It definitely evolves. I had a vision of something like that, but it was the sort of vision that I think one day I'd love to be, in my 50s and have 100 units or something like that. And then the next year when I bought the next five, I thought, well, maybe I really could do this thing, because you hear a lot of podcasts from people in bigger pockets who bought 50 houses in a year, or 30 units in 2 years, or 100 units in 2 years, or something crazy like that, or sometimes more. And I always thought, how does somebody do that? How does that even work? How can you make that happen? I'd love to do that, but it seems like you kind of have to win the lottery to do that. I don't know how people do that. By the second year of business, when I bought those five houses in November of 2023, I started to realize, okay, maybe really could scale things up a lot quicker than I initially planned. Maybe it's more than 2 houses a year. Maybe it's more than 3 houses a year. Maybe, I think my goal at the time was to have 10 or 15 by now. And of course now I have about 70. Um, and so at that point, I started to ramp up, my goal setting, my vision casting, and my kind of plan for how I would execute that. And then every year that grows, so at the end of 2024, I was sort of thinking about what to set as a goal for this year because I bought 14 units last year, and I was like, well, maybe I'll buy 30. That's a pretty crazy goal. Maybe I'll buy 30, and I thought, oh, I don't know, that seems kind of conservative. Maybe I'll do 40, maybe 50. And then I read, as much of a meme as Grant Cardone is, he has a lot of valuable information. And I read his book, The 10x Rule, and I thought, okay, I'm not going to 10x it because I'm not buying 500 units this year. That's crazy. But let me see if I can set a goal to do 100, which is my goal for the year. I don't know if I'm gonna hit that. I hope to, but we'll see. Right now, I'm kind of on track for that. But either way, uh, the point of his book was shoot for the moon, and if you don't hit it, you'll hit higher than where you thought you might hit. And so far, I've surpassed where my previous goal was and would have been, and it's only August. So hopefully that kind of helps answer your question in terms of the trajectory and when I kind of saw this level of growth as a real, opportunity and possibility for my company.
Well, before we kind of dig into like maybe how you're finding these deals and whatnot, I looked at kind of the your timeline and stuff, and I believe it took you 13 months between your first and your second deals. I mean,
Hmm.
what was going through your mind kind of during that period?
Yeah, yeah, that was definitely the season where I thought growth had to be much slower. Um, I bought that first house right after I left that job. That house needed a rehab, so I spent several months rehabbing that house. I also got married right after I finished rehabbing that house, and so I spent quite a bit of time preparing for that and honeymooning and all those sorts of things. And so that was kind of a slower year for business, but there was a lot of other really exciting things going on. And then I spent about 6 months doing handyman work full time, 6 to 9 months. And then in the fall of 2023, um, I got under contract on another property that didn't close until November, and that kind of ended up being 13 months deal to deal. But the thing I think I learned there was I really wanted to build a real estate business. I just didn't know how to do it. And I spent that time educating myself, getting to know people, building a contractor handyman business, learning how to hire people, getting married, enjoying that, and all those sorts of things. But and then after the second deal, which I sort of consider to be my first real deal because I wasn't living in that house and I used creative finance and it wasn't a W-2 purchase with 5% down. After that second deal, I was like, okay, I think I can really do this because there is kind of some experience there, which was really valuable to get.
So you kind of touched on it also. You mentioned kind of created finance. So I know
Hmm.
in your kind of summary, you kind of touched on you're doing a lot of owner financing, subto, and seller credit deals. Is there? Can you walk us through maybe one of your favorite creative finance deals, and also maybe what is the biggest mistake you've seen investors make when trying to structure creative financing?
Yeah, those are great questions. I would say my favorite creative finance deal was the second house I ever purchased, and that one was, like I said, was sort of the first deal in a sense for me because I bought that first house with a conventional loan, put $15,000 down. I rehabbed the basement into an apartment, lived there, rented out the top. I was essentially house hacking. Um, but that deal anybody can do. Anybody can go get a job where you can get a W-2 loan and buy a house if you live in a market where housing is affordable enough to do so. And so the second deal was really neat because I learned sort of how the creative finance side of real estate worked. And I didn't really learn at all by any means, but I learned my eyes started to open up to how real estate really works. I had gotten to know this gentleman in our local area who is a financial advisor and was selling off all of his property, and he had this house and he said, I'm interested in selling this. And I said, well, I would love to buy it. At the time I was really looking for a flip or some sort of deal to be kind of my way into real estate. And at the time I didn't have a W-2. I had quit my job about a year prior. And so everybody says you can't buy a house without a W-2. It's really hard to get financing without a W-2. And what that first deal taught me is a W-2 is great and it gives you some really good options, but it's also in some ways golden handcuffs because my eyes were open to the avenues of creative finance, business financing, and all those different things that I really wouldn't have learned if it hadn't been for that deal. And since then, I've bought dozens and dozens of properties, many of them zero down with equity, not the zero down deals by the skin of your teeth, but zero down deals with equity, with cash flow, and none of them with a W 2, many of them without having to show any tax returns. There's been a couple where I've had to show tax returns, which is fine. I'm happy to show them. Um, so all of that said, the second deal was this older gentleman, not really super old, but much older than me, who was a financial advisor. He was offloading this property, and he was like happy to try to work with me to figure out a way to structure it zero down. So he wanted 90,000 for it, but it had a bad roof, and I didn't have 10,000 to put a new roof on it. I had about 7,000, I think, in savings at the time, and it needed a new roof. And so I said, "Well, can I pay you 100,000 if you put a new roof on it, and I'll find the subs and I'll manage it and I'll make it happen?" He was like, "Yeah, we can do that." And then I, through an idea of his, because I didn't really know much about this, he said, "Well, here's what we can do. You can maybe fix the property up while we're under contract, and we can go to the bank and say, hey, seller only wants 100,000, but it's worth 140. Can you take that 40,000 as the down payment?" And so that's exactly what we did. I found a local bank here, a credit union. And for anybody wondering, local banks are a really cool hack. There's also some things to be aware of with demand features and other things in local bank loans that you should be concerned about. But local banks are a really great way to get creative financing options because they're flexible, they're lending their own money. So I found a local bank who was willing to let me put a down payment through sweat equity. So instead of doing handyman work for my friend Chris and other people for the next 3 months, I just spent 3 months fixing up this house. And I was trusting this gentleman who sold me the house not to pull it out from under me and sell it himself, because all we had was a contract that said I was buying it. We didn't write out all these terms. He's a good guy. I was trusting him not to pull it out from under me. And it was a bit of a risk, but I was fixing up someone else's house, and then I took it to the bank. We talked about it beforehand, and I said, "Look, let's get an appraisal. Let's see if we can make this thing happen." It appraised for 155. The seller only wanted 100, and I was able to get a few $1,000s back. $7,000, everything I put into it, I was able to get back at the closing table, which was really cool. So I got into this deal, and my whole down payment was just me putting in a bunch of sweat equity into the deal. Now, if I was buying the deal, I'd probably have to pay 70 for it because I have employees and I don't do the work myself, and it would cost a little bit more. Um, but as a first deal, it was incredible because right now it rents for 1540 a month, and I have $110,000 of debt on it. Cash flows really well. I have $45,000 of equity, and I was completely zero out of pocket. And the biggest and best thing that it did for me is it opened my eyes to the world of creative finance and the options that are out there if you're working with sellers who are willing to be flexible.
All right, so now like we can dig into that was a great creative finance deal you talked about, but is there any biggest mistakes you see investors making when trying to structure creative finance? Like you said, like you trusted that individual, like you said, he
Hmm.
luckily he didn't
Yeah.
want to sell it. But is there anything that sticks out now to you about structuring creative finance deals?
Um, I would say, um, I don't think I have anything super specific other than just making sure you've got your numbers are right and making sure you're not, people love to talk about off market deals and creative finance deals. Just because it's off market doesn't mean it's a good deal. Just because there's owner financing doesn't mean it's a good deal. So, I've turned down owner financing opportunities because they just didn't make sense. The interest rate was too high, all those things. So, but I mean, generally speaking, if it's a deal, if the numbers are right, go for it. I wouldn't really overpay for a deal because it has creative financing. But if the seller's willing to owner finance at 0%, there's a certain dollar amount, that makes sense at. Just don't go above that dollar amount. So that would be my thoughts on that. But I haven't seen, a super big pattern of something that I would be super concerned about, other than just making sure you're buying a deal that really cash flows, really has equity, those sorts of things.
Oh, great points. I think the one other thing I would add it is, even like, like the community that I've met Chris in, the one rental at a time, the school community. I think just being around other people and where you can bounce ideas off of. So like if you're putting
Hmm.
together some sort of structure, hey, so someone might be more versed in creative finance type things. You can always have them, hey, look at this, or what do you think of this? And you can always tinker with it. But that's definitely be around the right community to help grow your business and whatnot. But
Yeah,
with
that's super great advice. That's super important is be around the right people, know who to ask questions to, have people in your corner that you can seek advice from. That's very good.
now, what I really want to know is, like you said, you have 50 units purchased this year alone. I mean, like, how are you finding and negotiating these deals in such a competitive market?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't do a lot of off-market deal finding. I do some, but I don't do a lot. And I'm starting to sort of build an arm of the business, sort of a partnership with a friend to do some of that. But right now, I really don't do a lot. I'm like I said, I'm starting to do some. I've got a billboard that I'm going to start advertising, we buy houses and that sort of stuff on, and that and and so I don't do a ton of that. But the main thing I focus on, like you said, get in a community, get in a network of people. I really focus a lot of energy on my local market and getting to know people in my local market. And so most of the deals that I've purchased have been because somebody knows that Zach buys houses. I don't have signs out in town that say Zach buys houses. I don't have a website that says Zach buys houses. My billboard isn't up yet, but soon it'll say we buy houses. But um, most of that's because a wholesaler brought me a deal and I actually closed on it, or a real estate agent brought me a deal and I actually closed on it. And once you build a reputation for being someone who buys deals, when someone finds a deal, they want to bring it to someone who they know can close. When you find a really good deal, you don't want to bring it to someone who might close, and then you lose the deal and you lose your $15,000 assignment fee, or you lose your commission as the agent. And so the way I've been able to scale at this level has been two things. One, I take networking very seriously and I do a lot of it, but to me, it's fun. I'm a people person. I just like getting to know people. And so I just, really enjoy getting to know other investors. And usually that ends up being a mutually beneficial relationship for both of us. I might have a deal they might want, they might have a deal I might want. And then the second piece of that is I buy everything I see that the numbers work, minus a few specific things. So if there's a single family home in a bad part of town, but the numbers work, I'm going to buy it. If there's a single family home in a good part of town and the numbers work, I'm going to buy it. If there's a multifamily property and the numbers work, I'll buy it. That's just my philosophy. I want to grow my business and I want to try to grow it well. And obviously, I need to make sure I'm doing all the things on my end so that my business is conservative enough to be able to buy those deals. But once you sort of once people know that I buy houses and that I will very likely buy a deal they bring me that fits within my buy box, then people come to me. So how have I purchased the units I've purchased? It's just because a lot of people know, not a ton of people, but quite a few people know that I know about my business, know who I am, and are willing to bring me deals. And I couldn't do this without them. So I'm always happy to pay assignment fees and commissions and all that sort of stuff. I'm always very happy to do that because without those people who hunt deals and bring them to me, I wouldn't be able to make my business run.
Did scaling this quickly come with like unexpected headaches you wish you had prepared for?
That's again an excellent question.
Because it sounds like you're making a business. You have like a business too. It's not just
Mhm.
you being an
Yeah,
investor. You're creating a whole business here.
yeah. That's I sort of got on that when we first started talking. That's what I'm building. When I started, I was investing in real estate. Now I'm building a business, and my business invests in real estate. So if someone asks what I do, I usually don't say I'm a real estate investor. I usually say I run a real estate investment business, because that's what I do. So I have about a dozen people or so that work for me. Some of those are subs, but about five or six guys. Some on the construction side, some on the management side that help run everything. Um, and that has been what I've had to build essentially to get to where I am. So the first year I didn't have any employees except a few people I gave work to. Second year I hired a couple people as contractors. Third year I hired a few more, and now I'm building a team: a property manager, a project manager, a head of maintenance, and then a number of other people that focus on specific trades or specific things. So to your original question, what headaches or what things have I not wasn't aware of? I would say I'm a pretty kind of stress free person in general. So I don't things don't really concern me too much, as long as I'm making sure I'm doing moving all the chess pieces correctly in the business with the financials and stuff. But it's definitely been a huge property management undertaking to acquire 50 units in a year. That's been the biggest thing. I hired a really close friend of mine to work with me on the property management side of things, and he's done really well, which has been such a blessing. But having acquiring all these units has been, we got to get all of these new tenants into our online payment processing software, and we have all of these new maintenance requests. So now my maintenance guy, who used to do some construction on the rehab side and then some maintenance, is now doing almost all maintenance. And so there's definitely been some things I've learned in the scaling of that. Nothing has been super frustrating or anything like that, but there's been a lot of it's been a lot of work on the property management side, and I hired one person very specifically for that role so that we could build it out the way it's needed. Because if it was just me, I obviously wouldn't have been able to do it.
I love that. Is there any way, like, how do you manage the risk when you're adding units so fast? Like you said, you're hiring people that you trust, I guess, right?
Hmm. Yeah, what risks specifically are you referring to?
Like for me, I don't know if Chris mentioned. So like when I started, I got you know a dozen units fairly quickly. And I
Hmm.
guess for me, it was just the whole, buying the properties is one thing, but now becoming like a landlord in a sense is a whole different thing. So like you were talking about
Right.
onboarding people into your platforms. So the whole idea of, you have, you think you're going to be collecting rent every month, but there's always something that comes up, whether it's a
Yeah.
maintenance, whether it's a tenant not paying, and now you have all these bills that you have to pay. So how do you mitigate like these type of risks, especially when you're scaling so quickly? So I always tell people if I went slower, I'd be much further ahead at this time.
Mm. Yeah. No, that's a great question. I think um, for me, there's different types of risks. There is sorry about that. My Mac just had a notification. There's different types of risks. The first and biggest risk in the real estate business, I think, is the financial risk. And so the way that I mitigate that risk is from the beginning, every deal I've purchased stands on its own 2 feet without needing of any outside capital. And so when I put together a deal, if I need to bring money to the table, which sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, I source that money, whether it's money that comes from my business, money that I have, or money that's been raised from private capital. I source that money before the deal. I make sure it's a conservative amount of money for the project, and I make sure I know I can complete it. So every deal I have stands on its own 2 feet financially. Once that is taken care of, there's not really too much that I'm there's not really too many other risks I have to worry about because I know that if I can't get this job done fast enough with my guys, there's enough money in the deal to hire subs. So another thing I try to do is I do a lot of work in house, but when I put together my rehab budgets, I put them together as if I was subbing it all out, so that if I have too much work on my plate, I can sub out and there's money to do that. But the other thing that does is I have a house I bought recently. We closed in the house, we got the house, and the guys were like, "Hey, there's no electricity. It's not power's not coming on." So we go look at it. I get underneath the house and I look up and I realize all the wire was stripped out by somebody who probably sold it to buy meth. And that happened before I bought the house. All the copper, plumbing, all the copper wire completely ripped out. And I'm doing this project, generally speaking, in house. But but there's enough money in the deal to be able to cover those sorts of things. And this one was even a slightly tighter deal than some of the other ones that I typically do, but there was still enough money to be able to rewire the whole house. And so I think probably the long and short of your question for me is I make sure each deal financially stands on its own 2 feet without needing to, borrow from one deal to pay for another one, so that all I'm doing is just managing individual projects and individual assets and then refinancing out of all of them if it's a BRRRR, or keeping them if it's not a BRRRR, and continuing to allow the business to have each segment, work on its own.
You touched on the burst strategy a little bit, but as we've noticed, it's gotten harder in today's interest rate environment. How are you making the numbers still work? Do you think it's like your construction background gives you a slight advantage in this?
Yeah, there's a couple answers to that, but probably the biggest answer is my construction background. I've had 3 sewer lines go out in the last year. Not one of them has cost me more than $2,000 to fix, and one of them would have easily been like 12 grand if you hired somebody out to fix it. And so the reason for that is because I know how to replace a sewer line, at least I do now. And so I rented an excavator and I dug up the whole sewer line myself and put it all back together and refilled the dirt and repoured the driveway that was sitting on top of it. The next one that happened, we did the same thing. The next one that happened, my guys did it. But the piece there is that I'm able to save on costs by not subbing everything out. And so we've done pretty major foundation jobs. I just did one where we rebuilt an entire wall, long side wall of a house that's kind of like a ranch home, cinder block wall that was caving in, and that cost me I think about 7 grand. I haven't added up all the totals yet. Would have easily been 45,000 to hire a foundation company to come out and do it. And so because of that, I'm able to save on costs because of my construction background. And the other side of it is in terms of interest rates, I don't buy anything that's a 1%er. It's got to be like a 1.2 or more in terms of the 1% rule because of where rates are. So that limits what I can buy. A lot of the properties that work are C class properties. So I'm going to buy something that's a C class property. I'm going to fix it up. I'm going to make it real nice, something I can really stand behind. But then also be able to get the value out of it that's needed.
So now in growing your portfolio, I mean, what's been the most surprising thing you've learned about being a landlord at this scale?
Um, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's been the most surprising. It's definitely, I think I definitely thought it was more of a real estate rather than a business, real estate investment rather than, building a business. But that to me has been really a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge for a lot of people is the landlording side of things. It's like I said
Yeah,
earlier, it's the, acquiring the property is kind of that exciting part of it, but having to be a landlord is where a lot of people kind of struggle or give up, I guess. For so
yeah.
like for someone who has, one or two rentals and who wants to scale, what's the first step they should take?
I would say Um, it sounds cliche and simple, but buy a third or buy a fourth, and don't let yourself stop there. One of the things that I learned, and has kind of been a rule of thumb for me, is I always try to bite off a little more than I can chew. And you don't want to bite off way more than you can chew because then you get into problems of scaling too quickly. But I always try to bite off a little more than I can chew, and then I learn how to chew it. And I'm going to learn how to chew it because I don't want my business to fail or have problems. But that goes back to making sure each deal financially stands on its own. If the deal completely stands on its own, then I can bite off more than I can chew because I have the money to weather the storms if they come.
I
But
love
that
that. So
that's been the biggest growth strategy for me is just something seems a little bit crazy, like buying 12 units in a year seems a little crazy. And I was like, I'm gonna try to do it in about 14. And that's been the biggest growth strategy for me is biting off more than I can chew.
I love that because we just had a live in school call with Thatch Squin, and kind of what he left the message with us was, are you interested or are you committed? And that's the
Yeah.
difference for a lot of people. Like you said, you're gonna just figure it out, right? And like you have this goal of hitting 100 units. But what's next? Is it going to be keep growing or consolidate and optimize, you think, once you hit 100?
I would like to keep growing and optimizing. I think both and probably. I want to optimize the current portfolio, but also continue to build something. My goal is to build one of the best real estate companies in my local area. That's my goal. I want to be able to build something that influences people in a positive direction. Is a something that can provide housing for people, provide investment opportunities for wealthy people who want to earn money, and provide work for the people who work for me, and ultimately, point everybody to the Lord and give Him glory for everything He's given to me. So I think in that's kind of my driver is to build something that is one of the best in my city, and I don't know when that time will come or what that'll look like. Um, but for me, I'm not necessarily building something that'll, be an asset for retirement, although it certainly will be, but something that really can have positive influence in the direction of the people around me, and provide a service to all the different people who involve themselves in my business. And so, in light of that, I think probably my goal next year will be to continue to grow. I don't know how much, I don't know, what level, but to continue to grow and optimize the business as best as possible.
I love that. Now, do you think there's like a sweet spot though, like a number of units for lifestyle, or is it income balance, or is it just unlimited growth for you?
I don't know. I don't I don't have a I don't have a super luxurious lifestyle. My main vehicle is a 2003 Toyota Tundra with a missing front bumper and a mismatched back tailgate and dents down every side. If you saw like I say this jokingly, but it's true. I'm generally usually the worst car in the parking lot wherever I park. And I love that truck, and I don't plan to sell it anytime soon. And so I'm I don't um, I mean, I'd love one day I'd love to fly. I would really love to fly. So there's certainly hobbies like that that are expensive that I'd love to do, but um, it's not. If it was about the income itself, I could probably stop growing now. I could probably tell some people to go find other jobs, and I could kind of just manage everything. Um, but for me, it's really just about trying to build something that leaves a positive mark in the world, and like I said earlier, points people to God. It's kind of what I'd like to see.
What generation do you fall? Are you a what millennial or are you a Gen
I'm
Z?
Gen Z, I think
You're
so.
Gen Z?
Yeah,
Oh, okay. So yeah, I
yeah,
know millennials have been taking a lot of heat in social media right now for not wanting to work and all this. But I would just say the younger generation, there is a lot of people out there that are still pushing out there, and like you have a great vision. And I'm glad Chris said I needed to get you on my channel. And so one thing Chris can do for me, since since I'm always helping him out. But Chris is a good guy, so I'm glad you guys are connected. You're building a lot of cool stuff out there, and like you said, hopefully. You're willing to come back, hopefully get on some live streams. I think a
yeah.
lot of people can learn from you. But where can people find you? I know, like it sounds like you're trying to get out there a little bit more, get your message out there. But where can people
Hmm.
connect or reach you right now?
Yeah, yeah. All those are good things. Definitely, Chris is a great guy. Really appreciate him connecting us. Good friend. But yeah, I am on Instagram. I don't use it a ton, so if I don't message you back quickly, it's because I probably haven't checked it in a few days or a week or so. But my name is Zach Shepard, as it's spelled on the screen, with two underscores, and I'm pretty sure that's the handle, Zach underscore Shepard. And you can shoot me a message, or if anybody wants to connect, that's probably the best place to find me.
Well, we'll get him back on some live streams so you folks can get his contact information also that way. But this is a great story. I love seeing this younger generation kicking ass out there and doing a lot of cool stuff and not just sitting back on their video games and on Netflix and everything and making a lot of good things happen. But yeah, we'll get you
Definitely,
back on,
yeah.
Zach. I hope you had a lot of fun, and yeah, we'll catch everyone next time.
Awesome. Very good. Thanks for having me. I would love to come back sometime. Be happy to, and appreciate the interview.
All right, thanks for doing this, man.
All right. Thank you. Bye bye.